So a little bit about the author. She was born in 1917 during World War I. She grew up in a poor section of inner city Copenhagen. Her teenage years were in the Depression. Her education ended at middle school. Her father was an unskilled furnace stoker, and she had to leave school to get a job to help support the family. Her early 20s, World War II, Denmark was occupied by Nazi Germany, and she believed that her ticket out of a working poor existence was by marrying a husband who was better off, and possibly through her writing. She married Viggo Müller, who was a publisher, a small-time publisher, who was over 30 years older than she was. With his help, her first book was published, and she went on to write about a book a year for the rest of her life. 11 books of poetry, 7 novels, 4 short stories, 4 memoirs, 3 books of essays, and others. She was also an advice columnist in the most popular women's magazine in Denmark for 20 years, Denmark's Dear Abby, if you will. She became one of the most important and best-selling authors of the 20th century in Denmark, although she was continually criticized by the mostly male intellectual elite for mining her own life for material for her books. She was never invited to be a member of the Danish Academy, and her life was quite turbulent, which I will expand on more in a little bit. She was hospitalized several times for psychiatric problems and drug use, and she died a suicide of overdose of pills in 1976 at the age of 59. So my relationship with Tove Ditlevsen began in 2016 in Billund Airport. Billund is the birthplace of Lego blocks and Legoland. But they also have a bookstore in the airport. And I was browsing for reading material on my way out of Denmark when I came across her memoir, Gift, which had been republished with a number of her books because it was coming up on the centennial of her birth. So I bought Gift, not knowing what it was, except for that the definition of gift in Danish is both poison and married. So Gift became titled Dependency, the 3rd book of the Copenhagen Trilogy. And this book is a memoir of her life from the ages of 23 to 35. 12 years in which she became a high-profile best-selling author, had 4 marriages, 2 back-alley abortions, which were illegal at the time, and a 5-year near-fatal addiction to opioids. All this in about 100 pages. So despite these dramatic events, throughout the book, she maintains a sense of humor, a sense of elevated self-determination, and also a vulnerability that drew me in as a reader. In particular, my translation of Dependency made me realize that I had an implicit bias and judgment about drug use and dependency and addiction. That in growing up among family, friends, and media, I had taken on the attitude that if someone struggled with addiction or dependent behavior, then it was their own fault. And in the process of working on this book, I realized that there was a more compassionate and supportive alternative to my previous thinking. I learned that dependent behavior is a universal element of the human experience, which I also share. And it is not an individual's fault that is to be judged and dismissed. The strength in Ditlevsen's writing for me lies in both her voice, which is just so strong and clear, and also the subject matter she takes up, which holds a ton of vulnerability. But she was a poet first. She has a poet's ear, and her prose is both concise and precise. There is no fat on her pages. She speaks in my ear, she speaks as if she's telling me, the reader, as her confidant, the whole truth with nothing added and nothing left out. I remember distinctly when I finished the book after the last page and I laid it down, I said to myself, I think I just read a masterpiece. I discovered that the book had not been translated into English, even though it was 50 years old. So I applied for a grant to do a sample, which I received. But when I had finished the 15 pages, I decided to keep going because I was so captivated by the book and I believed in it. So I translated the rest on spec on my free time, hoping that I would find a publisher for it. What I didn't know was that during the year that I was pitching my manuscript vainly to any publisher I could find, so this is 4 years ago, I think, tomorrow, right? The Frankfurt Book Fair is tomorrow, right? Penguin Classics and Serpent's Tail Publishing from UK, they were going to the Danish and Scandinavian booths at Frankfurt Book Fair looking for a Scandinavian female author that they could promote. And they were pointed to Tove Ditlevsen. Meanwhile, I came in contact with Tove's Danish publisher, who then put me in contact with those two publishers, which resulted in a bidding war. And Ditlevsen became the first Danish writer in over 50 years published by Penguin Classics, not since Karen Blixen, who wrote Out of Africa and other stories. So my manuscript became combined with two memoirs of Tove's that were translated by Tina Nunnally 30 years ago and had been out of print. And together, Penguin Classics created the Copenhagen Trilogy, which I think was a brilliant stroke of marketing by them. I'd like to share with you two short excerpts from the Copenhagen Trilogy. The first one from childhood. Tove's 8, and she had been reading poems by Maxim Gorky. And so she exclaims to her family, I said happily, I want to be a poet too. Immediately, my father frowned and said severely, don't be a fool. A girl can't be a poet. Offended and hurt, I withdrew into myself again, while my mother and my brother Edwin laughed at my crazy idea. I vowed never to reveal my dreams to anyone again. So and then from dependency. So Tove has an abortion performed by a medical student in his dorm room. And he gives her a shot of Demerol, which was common at that time for that kind of thing. And she loves it so much that she ends up leaving her husband and marrying this medical student who becomes a doctor and continues to give her shots of Demerol pretty much on demand. Now she wants more shots, so she fakes an earache, at which time her husband sets up an ear operation for her with an ear surgeon. So this is after her operation. When I awoke from my anesthesia, my whole head was wrapped in gauze. And then I finally learned what an earache really was. I moaned, rolling back and forth in pain. This hurts so much, I told the doctor. Can't you give me something? Of course, he said, you can have aspirin. That's the strongest medicine we give in this ward. We don't turn people into addicts. When Carl finally arrived, that's her husband, He had his brown briefcase, and inside it the blessed syringe. And when he gave me a shot in the open vein, I said, "You have to come by all the time. I've never felt pain like this in my whole life. And here they only give you aspirin." "They might as well give you sugar pills," he mumbled. "Speak louder," I said, "I can't hear you." "You're deaf in that ear," he said. "You will be the rest of your life, but at least it won't hurt anymore." This lasted for 14 days. Carl stayed home from work and gave me shots whenever I asked. I lay motionless and limp in my bed and felt like I was being rocked to sleep in warm green water. Nothing else in the world mattered to me but staying in this blissful state. Carl told me lots of people are deaf in one ear, and it doesn't really matter. I didn't care anyway, because it was worth it. One night I woke up and realized the pain was just about gone. I was cold and shivering and so dehydrated, I had to use my fingers to pry apart my lips. Carl got up drunk with sleep and gave me a shot. "I don't know what we're going to do," he said, "when that vein clogs up too. Maybe we can find one in your foot." So I often think of translation as an act of service to the author, to the country, to the culture, to world literature, and to the reader. But Dependency struck me particularly as a book that could serve humanity, and the US in particular, given the opioid crisis. And I found the act of translating Dependency more devastating than any other work I've done. Because I felt that Tove was like my best friend, but she was betraying me in every chapter. But by the end, I felt that she had taught me more about compassion than perhaps anyone I've known. Her short stories attain a similar level of intensity, but are merciful just by being more compact. I find that the trilogy and the short story collection deliver a similar message of compassion and solidarity, that as people, our wounds are visible, and we deserve to be kinder to ourselves and to each other. Last month, I was in Denmark for a week-long translation conference with Danish literary translators from all over the world. I was the only one from the US that went. It was really unique to speak to other translators from Danish who had taken on Tove's memoirs into their languages in the wake of the success of the English translation. Because great books can be trapped in a way, in a small language like Danish, that it's not until the English work comes out that the value of the book can be evaluated and appreciated by editors and publishers around the world who have access to English but not to Danish. The Copenhagen Trilogy, since being published here, has been sold now to over 20 countries, and Tove Fever has officially made it out of Denmark. I was standing in my house recently just thinking about my path as a translator over the last 8 years. What did I ever really want from this? What was a benchmark for my success? And what I always wanted was some great book that had a deep meaning for me, that it would suddenly become widely available and touch lots of other people too. And I realized that 8 years into my career, this happened. And I was moved to tears, just feeling this oneness with my mission. I am currently working on 2 other Tove Ditlevsen texts. One is a book of poetry with Cynthia Groh, a colleague of mine. This is a later book of poetry called The Adults, and it would be her first book of poetry to appear in English. I'm also in the middle of translating an early novel called For the Child's Sake. Excerpts from both of these books have been published by World Literature Today, and you can find them on their website. Some poems from the poetry are also coming. They'll be out soon from the Los Angeles Review and the International Poetry Review. And I'm still looking for a publisher for both of those books. And I'm hoping that maybe the New Yorker publication will help the cause. So thank you for listening. I'm happy to take any questions you might have. And